So I want to start off today talking really briefly about the continuing education classes, because people have been asking me a lot, and they ask me in January when they're already supposed to have their hours in. So some of this is going to be recorded early so that I can put it out on YouTube, so I can send it to people to get the information out to them. When you're thinking about the continuing education, think about that our certificate as a chaplain opens doors as religious workers in a secular environment. So the classes that we're taking are things that the government or agency would recognize as valid. So that means Bible classes are basically out, right? Because they don't care about our Bible knowledge, but they do care about counseling classes and communications classes and budgeting classes. And if you think of working with the police department, what kind of skills do you need to work with the police department? You could do things like self-defense or, emergency training or CPR. A lot of people in agencies, they have to have a lot of continuing education just because, and seminars just required for their jobs. So most of those would apply, okay? So things like nutrition, things like family, things like budgeting, emergency, I mentioned that already, information. Those are just a couple of things. How the body works, how the mind works. There's just a lot of different things. If you can think of what somebody in need in an emergency or in a crisis or that needs counseling, what they need, the resources, the help they need from you, most of that would apply. So this is why I brought the table of contents to the chaplaincy program. So I'm going to scroll down online, but the first chapter, the first lesson is Introduction to Chaplaincy. So it talks about the overview of where chaplains are working in society. They can be working in education, they can be working in hospitals, they can be working in hospitals. Hospice. There's a lot. They can be working in industry. Tyson Foods has a very active chaplain program, believe it or not. So that talks about the different areas of administration chaplaincy or educational chaplaincy in the first one. Then the lesson 2, week 2, is communication and listening skills. Super important, right? Then lesson 3 is needs assessment and resource development. So we're looking at where you can go to find help for the people, like shelter. Family planning is also an important thing. People don't know that most birth control is not preventative. Most of it allows or facilitates the death of the conceived child. So that's an important type of thing. Lesson 4, laws that govern chaplaincy. There's reasons why chaplains are permitted in government agencies and different things that limit us as far as what we concern. So that's in lesson number 4. So learning about that. Number 5 is cultural diversity and tolerance, learning how to deal with people of different groups and different religions and backgrounds. And so that's an important thing. All classes in college or whatever require ethics. Even though people are not practicing ethics, they require in all degrees some type of ethics training, medical ethics. So we have a section of ethics and relational apologetics, which is showing how to present our faith in a real way in society. Lesson 7 is grief and loss, and it's a big subject because most of what we actually deal with is some type of loss and pain. So in lesson 8 is grief and loss review. 9 is crisis intervention. Okay, a lot of what we happen if we're meeting somebody one time, we're finding them shelter, the house burned down, and food, or somebody needs resources for an emergency. And then a crisis debriefing when people are in a tragedy, to help facilitate their processing of the crisis so that they don't get things like PTSD. There is a process that we can go to, a formal process, but also an informal process when we take these principles, how we can de-escalate the effect of an emergency or a tragedy. And when it's piled onto one another, it's magnified, okay? We can use our friend here as an example. Car accident, son dying, living in his home while he was dying, and different physical health problems himself. Those things can pile up and they physically affect us and mentally affect us. So learning about that. Lesson 11 is death notification and understanding trauma. Sometimes we might be called upon to help somebody when a family member has died. And then the last of the 12-week courses is a conclusion, wrapping things up and preparing people for an internship, because to get a certificate, there's an internship process and the application. So I wanted to share that on the screen and with all of you, because that kind of gives us some of the things that are applicable in what we would do with chaplaincy. If you have, like, you're a licensed social worker, you have to have continuing education. Medical personnel, as therapists or whatever, they need continuing education. So a lot of those things do apply to help us get the 12 hours that I asked for. It's not an unreasonable amount, because when you're in a profession, there's a lot, a teacher and a nurse, they have a lot of continuing education, because you don't want somebody to learn something one time and stay with their skill set from 20 years ago when they studied. I hope you don't want a doctor that's only knows what's going on from 20 years ago. Okay, so that's basically what I want to bring up about what's in our chaplaincy course and other things to help answer some questions about classes that are applicable. I did mention to someone that last year, most of the time, the Wednesday night classes at our church are not applicable, because they're mostly stuff that's related to Christianity. But one particular thing that one of the pastors did was on some of the sexual variances that we're experiencing in society today that were never recognized or considered valid. So because even though it's not a positive thing in people's lives, but understanding where these people they're coming from in society today. And that would also go along with the cultural diversity, understanding where people's mindsets and their founding philosophies in life are. If you want to attend one of these sessions as kind of a refresher, it could also count as continuing education.